Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something, well, deeply personal and really important. We're diving into one person's incredibly honest account of hitting rock bottom, dealing with cultural stigma around mental health, and figuring out this inherited weight we carry, generational trauma.
That's right. And the source material we have, it's not academic, it's raw. It comes right after what the author herself calls an explosive concoction of sadness, frustration, anxiety. A real crisis moment.
Exactly. So this isn't theory. It's lived experience.
And our job today really is to follow that journey. From that intense personal pain back through her family's history to understand this concept she talks about, the invisible rucksack. And, crucially, pull out the lessons for all of us on how to maybe break these cycles.
Yeah. And that urgency is why we're focusing on it. This deep dive, it's really for you, the listener, to maybe see how putting off your own self-care, especially when there's this pressure, this silence from society, how that doesn't just hurt you. It affects, as she puts it, every soul around them.
Which then leads to this whole process of reconciliation and this really powerful apology. One that she stresses is about love, not about guilt.
Okay. Now, before we jump into the analysis, the author wanted to share a brief introduction herself, just to set the stage.
Right. So here it is exactly as she provided it. I am Vanina Vergara, CV Vergara, to the English-speaking world, born in Asuncion, Paraguay. I have 3 children whom I love deeply, and this is my life.
Okay. Simple, direct, sets the foundation. Okay, let's unpack this. So we start right there, in the thick of it. The immediate aftermath of, well, a really bad time. Her therapist called it a crisis, and she agrees.
Yeah, that language, explosive concoction, it's so visceral, isn't it?
It really is. It's not just sadness, it's volatile. Like something just blew up.
Exactly. It suggests, immense pressure built up over a long time. Like it couldn't be contained anymore. It wasn't just a bad mood. It felt like an eruption. But what I find really key right from the start is her honesty about where she is now. She doesn't paint this picture of, I had a crisis, now I'm fixed.
Right. That's so important. She says, for as much as I advance, I know I am not wholly healed, and I wonder if I ever shall be. That feels incredibly real. Healing isn't a straight line, is it?
Not at all. And that's a vital message. Accepting that progress means more good days than bad, like she says, but not necessarily the absence of bad days. If you expect perfect, linear healing, the first dip, the first bad day can feel like total failure.
Yeah, you might just give up.
Exactly. So she's validating that ongoing struggle. Even within progress, it's okay to still be healing.
And she talks about this revelation that came after the fall, this moment where she had to affirm her whole life story. The child, the adolescent, the young mother, daughter, wife, all of it, as her truth, no diminishing it.
And that's the real turning point, isn't it? That act of claiming your own experience. Because so often, especially when dealing with unspoken pain or stigma, we learn to downplay it. Oh, it wasn't that bad, or I should be over this by now.
Yeah, or society tells you that.
Precisely. Society minimizes it or calls you dramatic. So she's pushing back. She's saying, no, this happened. This was my reality. You can't heal something you pretend didn't happen or didn't matter. That affirmation is step 1.
But why was it so hard to get there? She links the pain she felt at each stage directly to, well, silence. The silence of not knowing how to ask for help, she says, or maybe even worse, not receiving it due to ignorance or lack of empathy.
That really hits on the relational aspect, doesn't it? The internal struggle is one thing, but then there's the external failure, the family, the community. Maybe they didn't know how to help, or they lacked the empathy to even see the need. That turns private pain into something chronic.
Ignorance or lack of empathy, those are powerful accusations in a way.
Or just observations, perhaps.
Yeah.
Systemic failures. And when she says the pain is real and it is mine, she's taking ownership. It's almost like she's saying, I don't need your permission or validation to know my own suffering was real. It's an internal declaration.
Right, but then she pivots. She used that very personal declaration to talk about something bigger, something shared. She calls the unseen burden.
Yes, that transition is key. From my pain to this idea of a shared weight. It suggests her crisis isn't just an isolated event, it's a symptom of something larger, something maybe inherited.
So her specific pain is hers, but the conditions that allowed it to fester, those might be shared, passed down.
Exactly. It perfectly sets up the next part of her reflection, where she really digs into the cultural stigma that kept her silent for so long. And what's really striking here is just how long this went on. She talks about 20 years. 20 years of actively putting herself last, of belittling the idea of therapy.
20 years. I mean, that's almost a whole phase of adult life, isn't it?
It is, and it wasn't just forgetting about it. She says she belittled it because of that stigma. The belief that, in her words, only the mad went to a psychologist.
Wow, that specific phrase, the mad. It tells you so much about the cultural perception.
Absolutely. She specifies it was a taboo in Paraguayan society and in my circle. This wasn't some vague idea. It was a concrete social reality for her. Seeking help wasn't seen as proactive health management. It was seen as admitting you were fundamentally broken, defective even.
Which would lead to shame or being ridiculed. She mentions it being treated as a jest.
Right. So the social cost was incredibly high. You risk ostracization, judgment, becoming the butt of jokes. That's a massive deterrent, especially when you're already feeling vulnerable.
So you're hurting inside, but the need to belong, to avoid that social pain, forces you to hide it. How did she cope for 2 decades?
Through what she calls the false consolation, minimizing it, telling herself this will pass, or falling back on that cultural script. These matters are not spoken of. Just silence it, push it down.
It's a survival strategy, in a way. You can keep functioning right, keep up appearances.
You can. You can raise kids, work, maintain relationships. Outwardly, things might look fine, but inwardly, that pressure cooker is just building and building because the pain doesn't actually go away just because you don't talk about it.
And then comes the realization, but they did not pass. That must have been a heavy moment.
Devastating, I imagine, because all those years of telling herself it was temporary weren't true. It wasn't just passing through, it was settling in.
She says they crystallized into a diagnosis in my 40s, from a passing storm to a condition.
That's a really important distinction, clinically and personally. A storm, it's intense, but it moves on. You rebuild. A condition, it changes the landscape permanently. It's woven into your being, your way of functioning, your relationships.
But the delay, fueled by that cultural shame, meant she wasn't just dealing with temporary distress anymore. It had become part of her baseline.
Exactly. She was trying to use temporary fixes, this will pass, for something that had become chronic, structural. And the delay meant it had become much more entrenched, much harder to address.
And this reinforces that earlier point, doesn't it? Even though this diagnosis feels intensely private.
Right. She says it touched every soul around me. The private condition inevitably had public consequences.
How does that work? How does one person's internal state affect others so profoundly, especially if it's unspoken?
Well, think about it. Chronic, unmanaged depression or anxiety changes how you interact with the world. Maybe you become withdrawn, emotionally unavailable, or perhaps irritable, easily angered, maybe hypercritical. Your family, your partner, your children. They experience those behaviors. They might not know why you're acting that way. They might not know the diagnosis.
But they feel it. They live with it.
Absolutely. They live with the tension, the unpredictability, the emotional distance. The silence of one person's suffering can create a really difficult, sometimes exhausting environment for everyone else. Even with the best intentions, the illness spills over. Which again leads us towards why that apology she makes later feels so necessary.
Okay, so here's where things get, well, even deeper, I think. She starts connecting her own struggles to her parents. And the trigger for this reflection seems to be loss and observation.
Yes. She mentions missing her mother, who'd been gone 10 months, and at the same time, she's watching her father, seeing him bowed beneath grief and depression, and importantly, still reluctant to tend to himself.
So she's seeing the pattern repeat right there in front of her, in her own father.
Exactly. It's like a living illustration of the cycle. His reluctance to seek help mirrors her own past reluctance, perhaps, and seeing him suffer forces her to look back at their lives, her parents' lives.
But instead of blaming them, which might be the first instinct for some, she finds empathy, real understanding. She says they did what they could with the tools they had.
That is such a crucial shift in perspective, isn't it? Moving from why didn't you do better to what limited you? Recognizing that they too suffered. They had their own difficult childhoods weighing on them.
It reframes them not as the source of the pain necessarily, but as carriers of it, fellow sufferers in a longer chain.
Precisely. It's the breakthrough that allows you to see the generational pattern without getting stuck in blame. You start to understand the system, not just the individual actions. They were also victims of the environment they grew up in, the tools they were never given.
Which brings us to this core metaphor she uses, the invisible rucksack. She says her parents shouldered rucksacks they never learned to lighten. Let's unpack that. What's in this rucksack?
Well, it's probably not one big dramatic thing. It's likely the accumulation of everything. Unprocessed griefs, maybe financial anxieties passed down, societal pressures, rigid rules about emotions. Things like don't complain, be strong, work harder, don't talk about feelings, all those messages we absorb.
The things you're taught not to do or not to talk about?
Exactly. And crucially, they lacked the tools to deal with it. They didn't have the language for emotions. Maybe therapy wasn't an option or was even more stigmatized for their generation. They didn't know how to identify what was weighing them down, let alone how to take it out of the rucksack and deal with it. So they just kept carrying it.
And you can't teach what you don't know. So they couldn't teach her how to lighten her load because they didn't know how themselves.
That's the tragedy of it. They modeled the only way they knew: suppression, silence, just carrying on. And that becomes the default operating system for the next generation.
Which leads to this absolutely heartbreaking thought from her psychiatrist.
That her parents were likely never happy.
Wow. Just let that sink in.
Yeah.
An entire life, potentially, lived without real happiness because of this unaggressed weight.
It's devastating, and it raises the stakes incredibly high for breaking the cycle, doesn't it? Suddenly focusing on your own mental health isn't selfish. It's almost a responsibility. A chance to claim the happiness your ancestors might have been denied.
So that profound sadness she feels isn't just grief for them, it's fuel for her own healing.
I think so. It's fuel for her commitment to not pass that same legacy on. It's a fight for joy for herself and for her own children.
But it's still tricky, isn't it? Understanding why parents were limited is one thing. Forgiving the actual hurt caused by those limitations is another. How does she navigate that?
Well, she doesn't jump straight to forgiveness. Interestingly, she first turns the lens back on herself. She acknowledges her own limitations, her own part in the cycle, before fully processing theirs. And that leads us to the apology.
Right, so connecting that understanding of her parents' rucksacks immediately forces her to look at her own actions over the years. And she faces what she calls the hardest truth, which is,
I, too, did what I could with the tools at my disposal, with my inner and outer judges.
exactly, it's an admission of her own limitations. She's saying, look, I wasn't operating with the full toolkit either. Especially during those 20 years of denial and silence. She was running on instinct, on cultural programming, maybe on survival mode.
Not unconscious, healthy choices, because she didn't have the tools for those yet.
Right, and the direct result of operating while, as she says, broken without knowing why, well, that's the spillover effect we talked about. Yeah, she's explicit. Sadness, depression, anxiety, any illness of the mind does not belong to one alone. It spills over.
It fundamentally challenges that idea that mental health is purely internal, purely private. It always impacts relationships. The emotional climate of a home shifts completely when someone is struggling silently.
And the people around them feel that shift,
That,
even if they don't understand it.
exactly. They might experience it as withdrawal or anger or inconsistency. And crucially, she adds, they often did not know how to cope with it all. So they were affected by her pain, and they were unequipped to handle it. They were caught in the spillover, also without tools.
Which makes her next step feel so necessary, the apology.
Yes, and she's very careful about framing it. Not an apology born of guilt, but of love. What do you think that distinction means?
Well, guilt feels self-focused. Like, I feel bad because I did wrong. Whereas love,
Yeah.
maybe that's focused on the other person's experience.
I think that's exactly it. Guilt centers on your own feelings of failure or fear of judgment. An apology from love or maybe remorse focuses on the impact on the other person. It's saying, I see how my actions, regardless of my intention, caused you pain, and I am sorry for that pain. It prioritizes acknowledging their hurt.
So she's not necessarily apologizing for being unwell, but for the consequences. For the times, her pain, her process, her choices made while she was struggling, unintentionally wounded others.
Precisely. When you're broken without knowing why, you make decisions differently. You react differently. Maybe you pull away when someone needs closeness, or snap when you're feeling overwhelmed. You don't mean to cause harm, but harm happens. Scars are left.
Scars, yeah. And those scars, those unintended wounds.
Yeah.
That's how the struggle continues, isn't it?
It is. She describes it as a heavy chain passed from generation to generation.
That's a powerful image. A chain. heavy binding passed on almost automatically.
Yeah, it emphasizes that it's often not a conscious choice to pass it on. You just repeat the patterns you learned. You carry the weight because you don't know how to put it down. The scars are the proof the chain is still dragging.
Until someone does something different, the chain persists, she says, unless one dares to break it.
And that is the revolutionary act, isn't it? Daring. It takes courage.
What does that daring look like in practice?
It looks like seeking therapy when the culture says not to. It looks like acknowledging the rucksack, admitting the pain. It looks like having difficult conversations. It looks like making that apology born of love. It means consciously choosing different tools, even if you're learning them as you go, so you don't pass the same chain to your own kids.
Trading cultural comfort maybe for emotional freedom down the line.
That's a good way to put it. It's choosing health over inheritance.
Okay, so moving from that very personal act of breaking the chain, the author broadens the lens again. To prevention. To us, having lived through the cost of that 20-year delay, her message is urgent. Don't wait. Speak up. Get help. Now.
Yeah, her personal story becomes a universal cautionary tale. Don't wait for the crisis. Don't let the storm become a permanent condition. And she grounds this urgency in a really important observation about how the world is changing.
Right. Mental health isn't just a private shame anymore. She says it's now seen as a matter of public health, globally, even in Paraguay.
That's a massive shift. It takes it out of the realm of individual moral failing and puts it into the realm of, well, collective well-being and societal responsibility, governments, health systems. They're starting to recognize the huge cost of not addressing mental health.
And she gives that fascinating specific example, England creating a ministry of loneliness.
I know, right? It sounds almost strange at first, but it's profound. Why does loneliness need a ministry? Because chronic loneliness, that invisible burden, has massive measurable public health consequences. Higher rates of physical illness, dementia, healthcare costs.
It's proof that these internal states, these rucksacks, have tangible external impacts that society has to deal with.
Exactly. The government is essentially acknowledging that emotional well-being, or the lack of it, is a structural issue, not just a personal problem. It needs infrastructure.
And part of what's enabling this shift, she notes, is information, technology. Social media, for all its flaws, has opened the floodgates of information, helping to normalize these conversations.
It really has. Compared to the silence and stigma she grew up with, there's so much more validation available now. You can go online and see thousands of people sharing similar experiences. It chips away at that feeling of being alone or mad.
Which leads to her great analogy,
Yeah.
making a therapist's appointment as ordinary as one with the dentist.
It's perfect, isn't it? It reframes mental health care as routine maintenance. Preventative care. You go to the dentist for checkups to prevent problems, not just when your tooth is obsessed. We need to treat our minds with the same proactive respect.
There is no shame in it. That's the goal.
Absolutely. And if we accept that, if we move towards prevention, then where do we focus our efforts, she says? Around the family table, in schools, in every corner. It needs to be woven into daily life.
So what does that actually look like? Prevention in schools?
Well, it could mean things like social emotional learning curriculums taught alongside math and reading, teaching kids emotional vocabulary, giving them the words to name feelings like anxiety or frustration so they don't grow up silent like she did, teaching coping skills, conflict resolution.
And around the family table?
Maybe it means parents being more open, age-appropriately, about their own feelings and how they cope, modeling healthy communication, intentionally making space for difficult conversations rather than shutting them down, creating a home environment where vulnerability is safe, not shamed.
So building the tools into foundations, basically.
Exactly. So the next generation doesn't have to start from scratch or wait 20 years. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, really. If we're going to build this preventative culture, what's the essential ingredient? Based on her reflection, it comes down to empathy. Specifically, what she calls recognizing the hidden weight.
Right. Empathy defined as remembering we never truly know what rucksack another is carrying. That idea alone, if we really took it to heart, could change so many interactions, couldn't it?
It could. It encourages us to pause before judging someone's behavior, to assume there might be a struggle underneath we can't see.
But, and this is important, she draws a clear line. Empathy isn't an excuse.
No, absolutely not. She states clearly, I do not excuse cruelty or mistreatment. Understanding why someone might be acting harshly because of their own heavy rucksack doesn't mean you have to tolerate abuse or harmful behavior.
So we can hold empathy for the person's struggle, but still have boundaries about their actions.
Precisely. You can try to understand the root of the behavior without accepting the behavior itself if it's damaging you. It's a nuanced stance.
And that understanding requires looking deeper, seeing the root of harshness. She urges us to see that behind many harsh acts stands a soul that does not know what to do with its own weight.
That's a call for real psychological insight, isn't it?
And-
Look past the defense mechanisms, the anger, the withdrawal, the criticism, and see the vulnerability beneath. Often people lash out because they're overwhelmed by their own internal pain and simply lack healthier ways to express it or cope with it.
Their rucksack is overflowing and they don't know what else to do.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And if we can see that, maybe we can respond differently. Not necessarily absorb the harshness, but maybe respond with a question about what support they need, rather than just reacting with our own anger. It's
Yeah.
advanced empathy.
Yeah, it takes work. And through all of this difficulty, the crisis, the stigma, the generational weight, the hard truths she ends on a note of. Well, hope, resilience, gratitude for possibility, giving thanks that rising again is possible.
It's a powerful testament, isn't it? After everything, she acknowledges this inner force. Call it spirit, God, resilience, whatever. Something deep within has kept me standing to this day. It's proof that even the heaviest chain doesn't have to be the end of the story. Healing, recovery, breaking the cycle, it is possible.
And that possibility fuels her final wish, her final hope.
Yeah, that no one else should have to reach that brink, that crisis point, simply because they lacked support. For want of a voice, a hand, a simple "you can" or "I will help you."
It brings it right back to connection,
Yeah.
to community, to breaking the silence.
Exactly. Her intensely personal journey becomes a call for collective responsibility.
Right.
We all have a role in offering that voice, that hand. Hashtag, outro box.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the core messages for you listening feel really clear. First, the immense cost of generational silence means that breaking that chain, however hard, is vital work. Second, the healing power of apology when it comes from love and acknowledges impact is profound. And finally, cultivating that radical empathy, recognizing the unseen burdens others carry, isn't just nice, it's essential for prevention and connection.
And this reflection, this vulnerability, isn't just a closed story. The author explicitly invites further dialogue. I read letters sent to mailtoe.vergaravanina@yahoo.com.
Okay, an open door for connection there. And now, for a final thought for you to take away. Thinking about that shift in perception, how therapy went from being shameful to becoming, hopefully, as normal as a dental checkup. Here's the question. What common aspect of our daily lives today, something we maybe complain about that largely accept, might future generations look back on as a major, unaddressed mental health burden requiring structural prevention? Think about that ministry of loneliness. Is it our relationship with technology, financial precarity, the sheer pace of life? What invisible weight are we currently normalizing that needs addressing now to lighten the rucksacks of the future? Something to think about. Until next time on The Deep Dive.